Thank you all for the opportunity to join me. And I thought what I'd do is just share briefly why I decided to run for governor and a little bit about what I'm hoping to accomplish, and then look forward to the discussion. I decided to run really for the very same reasons I got into public service in the first place. A deep appreciation for the role that public institutions can play in people's lives. And I know that because of the role that public schools played in my life as a kid. When I was growing up, both my parents were educators, but they both passed away when I was little. My mom when I was 8, and my dad when I was 12. And in the period when it was just my dad and me, my dad was struggling with Alzheimer's. And so home was incredibly difficult, unstable, scary a lot of the time. And the thing that saved me was school. School was the one place in my life that was safe and consistent and nurturing. And I was blessed to have a series of public school teachers who gave me a sense of hope and purpose. After my dad passed, I moved around different family members, different schools. And as a teenager, I struggled the way young people often struggle who've experienced trauma at early ages. I got in a lot of trouble, actually got kicked out of high school. And again, it was teachers and a school counselor who intervened in my life, were willing to see me as more than the sum of my mistakes, gave me a second chance, and because of them, I became a lifelong educator. I was a high school social studies teacher, I was a middle school principal, led schools at the local level and state level before serving, as Sarah mentioned, as Deputy Secretary and then as Secretary of Education for President Obama. And since the end of the administration, I've been running an education civil rights organization that focuses on equity for low-income students and students of color. But as an educator, you see how all the other systems impact kids and families and their outcomes, whether or not they have safe and affordable housing, whether or not they're food insecure, whether or not their families get caught up in our system of mass incarceration, whether or not parents can find a good job. And so over my career, I've gotten increasingly involved in cross-sector issues. When COVID hit and I could see the disparate impact COVID was having on low-income communities and communities of color in the state, I founded a progressive advocacy organization called Strong Future Maryland to work on an equitable recovery from COVID. And through Strong Future Maryland, worked on issues like protecting folks from eviction, addressing economic needs in historically underserved communities. And through that work with the General Assembly and with advocates around the state, just became convinced that the next governor will be uniquely positioned to make government a force for good in people's lives in much the same way that public schools were such a powerful force for good in my life. I've focused the campaign on 3 core pillars. Education, of course, because I believe that's at the foundation of the health of our economy and our democracy. We need to follow through on the blueprint for Maryland's future. We need to build on the blueprint by investing, I believe, in universal affordable childcare, investing more resources in our community colleges and our HBCUs that play such a vital role in creating engines of opportunity. The second pillar for me is issues of economic dignity and economic development. What I mean by that are things like paid family leave, investing in the supply of housing that we need, that folks can afford, addressing the costs of healthcare, ensuring that we are investing in public transportation, those kinds of quality of life issues that are core to the success of our economy. The third pillar for me is the environment and taking action on climate. And I don't have to tell you all, we are already seeing the consequences of climate change around the state, whether it's the flooding that's happening regularly in Ellicott City and Howard County, or the flooding we saw not that long ago in Baltimore and Annapolis, the loss of farmland on the Eastern Shore to saltwater intrusion. These are all signs that climate change is a today problem, not a 30 years from now problem. And we need a governor who will lead on those issues, not just say the words climate change, but commit to the policy changes and building codes and transportation and renewable energy that will get us to net zero greenhouse gas emissions. So that's the frame that I've used: education, economic development, and economic dignity, and then the environment. And the last thing I'll say, and then would love folks' questions, as we tackle all of those issues, I believe we need to do it with a racial justice lens. I believe that as a matter of lived experience. I believe that as a matter of principle. And I also believe that as a matter of a deep appreciation of our history as a state around issues of race. So I'm speaking to you from Silver Spring, Maryland, where I live. It's about 25 miles from where my great-grandfather was enslaved in Gaithersburg, Maryland. The property where my great-grandfather was enslaved is actually still owned by the family that are direct line descendants of the family that enslaved my family. And the property's actually been maintained almost exactly as it was in the 1860s, same main house that was built in the 1700s, and the cabin that my great-grandfather and his family lived in as enslaved people is still standing on the property. So I've had the opportunity to stand inside of that cabin with my wife and daughters and to contemplate really two things. One, the immense cruelty and intimacy of the institution of slavery. That cabin is not 30 yards from the main house. These were two families living in the same physical space, one owning the other. And so many of our challenges today are connected to that history of slavery, of segregation, of redlining. But the other thing that I contemplate standing in that cabin is how profound it is that in my family, we went in 3 generations from enslaved in that cabin to serving in the cabinet of the first Black president. And that is only possible when you create paths to opportunity. And that ultimately, for me, is what this campaign is about, ensuring opportunity for all Marylanders, regardless of race, regardless of the language they speak at home, regardless of region of the state. And that's what I want to deliver as governor. So with that, would love folks' questions.
Thank you, Mr. King. Let me turn first to the committee members and see if folks do have questions for our candidate. Please raise your hand if you do, or launch them. Norman?
Thank you for being with us, Secretary King. Your economic plan that you've been talking about, maybe you could talk a little bit how it would impact the Eastern Shore. We have a lot of issues that people are dealing with here as far as substandard housing. Education is really troubled right now, to say the least. So how would your economic plan specifically help the Eastern Shore? You mentioned climate change, but on all those issues.
Sure. Well, the blueprint ultimately is about getting more resources to our highest needs schools. We need a governor who will follow through on that. Just in the last few weeks, Governor Hogan proposed a budget that underfunds the blueprint by about $140 million. So it really matters to have a governor who's committed to the blueprint. That will translate into better teacher pay, expanded pre-K, better career and technical education in our high schools, more college-ready opportunities in high schools, and making all of our high poverty schools community schools with wraparound services. That's part of what we need to do. Certainly the issue of childcare is a very real challenge in every part of the state. Folks having access to affordable childcare. And this is an issue that cuts across party. I talk to conservative business owners who say they literally have people walking off the job because they can't find affordable childcare. So we've got a plan for getting to universal, affordable, quality childcare birth through 5. That'll make an immediate difference in people's day-to-day lives. We need to do more for economic development, particularly helping small businesses to start and grow. One of the things I've proposed is the creation of a state bank that would hold the state assets, but be able to work with community banks to make resources available to folks who want to start and grow small businesses. That's critical. We also need to invest in our public higher education institutions so that folks can get training for the jobs that are most in demand, including jobs in renewable energy, regenerative agriculture, some of the areas that will grow as we tackle climate. The last thing I'd mention, or two last things, broadband is vital for not just the Eastern Shore, it's true in Western Maryland, true in Southern Maryland. We've got to make sure that everybody has access to reliable internet. It's key to economic opportunity. It's key to educational opportunity, to accessing health services. And the other thing I want us to think about is how do we revitalize some of the downtowns? If you look at Salisbury, part of what they've been able to do is attract folks to downtown because of investment in the arts and investment in mixed-use development, retail and housing in a downtown that is slowly revitalizing. And that's something I think we need to replicate in more places around the state.
Thank you. Do I have other questions? I open the floor. Please raise your hand. We'll call on you. Linda Lindsay, please.
Hi, I'm a member of the Worcester County Democratic Women's Club. Thanks for having this forum tonight. Mr. King, back in the 80s, our governor wanted to promote equitable and childcare for everyone, and he set the example of having a daycare center at the Maryland State facility in Baltimore City. And it was a model program to set the tone for both private and government. Did you ever hear of anything like that? And of course, when the administration changed, it was abolished. All my friends lost their jobs. But what do you think about that idea?
I love that. I don't know if you're familiar with the Judy Centers that
Absolutely.
That are, in many ways a model for what we need to build, named after Congressman Hoyer's late wife.
Yeah, there's no reason why every administration and every time we have a push for childcare, which we've known for decades was important, it's like we're starting from scratch, and it's silly to do that when we have these models.
That's right. And, all of our international competitors, they get that. Right? All our international competitors are investing in childcare and realize that's good for kids' educational outcomes and good for economic development.
And it's a huge women's issue, and a lot of the opposition to childcare is opposition to women.
I agree with that. Actually, my running mate, Michelle Seary, runs the Women's Law Center of Maryland. And one of the things that really drew her to wanting to join me in the campaign is addressing the crisis of care, which disproportionately affects women, both child care and the challenges around elder care. We've got a 20,000 person wait list for in-home care.
Thank you.
If I may, one of the major issues in COVID and COVID recovery is the tight labor market. And one of the major reasons, not the only reason given for that, is childcare, right? So it becomes quite a workforce issue as well. Normally I'd be wrapping up at this point. Correct me if I'm wrong, Norman, I don't believe that Jen Pingley is on the call, in which case we could afford to give Secretary King a couple more minutes if we have other questions for him. Are there other questions for the Secretary? If not, I will launch one. You talked about environment, and that'll be also, you're obviously aware of some of the issues that Eastern Shore is facing environmentally, including the sinking, rising sea level problem that we have. But the one I want to ask you about, which is near and dear to many of our hearts, is the Ocean City wind turbines and the current administration's effort to stop that. What's your view of it, and how would you approach it?
Yeah, well, look, if you're going to get to net zero greenhouse gas emissions, offshore wind is going to be an essential part of that. And I think the Hogan administration, by sort of slow walking offshore wind, has actually hurt the state's long-term economic positioning. We should be leading on offshore wind. Instead, we're trailing behind other states. One thing that I think is going to help us make the argument, there's a steel plant in Baltimore County that is now reopened to provide steel for wind turbines throughout the Mid-Atlantic region. So I think that, to me, is a perfect illustration that renewable energy is a job creator, that we're not trading economic development against the environment. They actually go together. So we should move very quickly to expand our offshore wind capacity. We also need to think about solar, and there are some interesting efforts to do combined farming with solar. And we've got to make sure that we're providing a lot more of our energy from renewable energy instead of our reliance on fossil fuels. And we got to get there urgently. We've put forward, I hope folks will check out our website, johnkingforgovernor.com, but we've put forward a plan for how we get to net zero by 2035. It's really ambitious. But when you think about the consequences of failing to act, this is an urgent need.
Thank you, Secretary King, for coming tonight and joining us and allowing us to ask questions and presenting our agenda. There are many candidates running, and we are trying to talk to each one, and we're looking forward to some of the forum that we understand are being organized throughout the state, where you're all debating, and we'll get a chance to
Exactly.
hear what each of you have to say on some of the same questions. But
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to join you. I'll put our website in the chat, and I look forward, hopefully, to many of you joining the movement that we're building. But I'm grateful to you for participating in our democracy. You know, I started out, as I said, teaching high school social studies and civics, and this is what democracy looks like, right? Citizens gathered together thinking about how we make our state better. So thanks for the opportunity.